Good evening, everyone. It's good to see all of you tonight. Come on, let's give God a hand of praise. Come on, we can do better than that. So we are here tonight, and I'll go into the purpose in a few minutes, but the past 2 weeks, I've sort of immersed myself in reading as much as I could about slavery in America. And what started out, and I planned this thing about 3 months ago, what started out as a grandiose vision of what we were going to do and how it was going to be done, the more I read, the more humble I became. Because I said to myself, I think I've bitten off more than I can chew. How do you shrink? How do you minimize 400 years into an hour and a half service? It's impossible. How do you tell the stories of those whose stories have never been told? How do you even begin to recall names of ancestors who had no names? And so through prayer, God just sort of calmed my spirit and just said, we want to gather here tonight to remember. I think one of the biggest concerns that I have about our state today and our generation and future generation is that many of our young people don't know our history. And many just believe that the history started with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But the reality is there were some slaves who were brought here, not by their own, but they were brought here. And somewhere around August 1619, they landed. And so tonight we are here to remember. It is a worship service. I'm not calling it a celebration, because how can we celebrate? I mean, can we celebrate what God has done? Yes, but we want to remember and thank God in our own way. And so I figured instead of doing like a formal welcome, over 400 years, if we have been blessed and God has blessed us as a people to thrive and to grow in spite of, I think it's just a declaration and a testimony just to touch ourselves and just say, thank God I made it. Let's give God a hand of praise. Yeah. Sometime in 1619, a Portuguese slave ship, the São João Bautista, traveled across the Atlantic Ocean with the hull filled with human cargo. Captive Africans from Angola in southwestern Africa. The men, women, and children, most likely from the kingdoms of Ndongo and Congo, endured the horrific journey, bound for a life of enslavement in Mexico. Almost half the captives have died by the time the ship was seized by 2 pirate ships, and the remaining Africans were taken to Point Comfort, a port near Jamestown, the capital of the British colony of Virginia, which the Virginia Company of London had established 12 years earlier. The colonist, John Rolfe, wrote to Sir Edwin Sandys of the Virginia Company that August of 1619. He was known as a Dutch man of war. And with that, he arrived to this colony, and his quote is, he brought nothing or brought anything but 20 and odd Negroes. That's how they summarized the first 20 that arrived. 20 and odd Negroes, which the governor and Cape merchant brought for the victuals. The Africans were most likely put to work in the tobacco fields that had recently been established in that area. Forced labor was not uncommon. Africans and Europeans had been trading goods and people across the Mediterranean for centuries. But enslavement had not been based upon race. The transatlantic slave trade, which began as early as the 15th century, introduced a system of slavery that was commercialized, racialized, and inherited. Enslaved people were not seen as people at all, but as commodities to be bought and sold and exploited. Though people of African descent, free and enslaved, were present in North America as early as the 1500s, the sale of the 20 and odd Africans set the course for what will become slavery in these United States. These are the words of Mary Elliott and Jasmine Hughes.
The iron entered our souls, lamented a formerly enslaved man named Caesar, as he remembered the shackles he had to wear during his forced passage from his home in Africa to the New World. They used restraints around the arms and legs, the coarse metal cut into captive African skin for the many months they spent at sea. Children made up about 26% of the captives, because governments determined by the ton how many people could be filled onto a slave ship. Enslavers considered the children especially advantageous. They could fill the boat's small spaces, allowing more human capital into the cargo hold. Africans were crammed into ships with no knowledge of where they were going or even if they would be released. This forced migration known as the Middle Passage. As Olaudah Equiano, the formerly enslaved author, remembered, I was soon put under the decks, and there I received such a salutation in my nostrils as I have never experienced in my life, so that with the loathsomeness of the stench and crying together, I became so sick and low that I was not able to eat, nor had I had the least desire to taste anything. I now wish for the last friend, death, to relieve me. Overheating, thirst, starvation, and violence were common aboard slave ships, and roughly 15% of each ship's enslaved population died before they even reached the land. Suicide attempts were so common that many captains placed netting over their ships to prevent loss of human cargo and therefore profit. Working class white crew members too committed suicide or ran away at port to escape the brutality. Enslaved people did not meekly accept their fate. Approximately 1 out of 10 slave ships experienced resistance, ranging from individual defiance, like refusing to eat or jumping overboard, to full-blown mutiny.
In 1831, Nat Turner, along with 70 enslaved and free black people, led a revolt in Southampton County, Virginia. It shook the nation. Turner, a preacher who had frequent, powerful visions, planned his uprising for months, putting it into effect following a solar eclipse, which he interpreted as a sign from God. He and his recruits freed enslaved people and killed white men, women, and children, sparing only a number of poor white people. They killed nearly 60 people over 2 days before being overtaken by the state militia. Turner went into hiding, but was found and hanged a few months later. It was one of the deadliest revolts during slavery, a powerful act of resistance that left enslavers scared for their lives. But not only scared for their lives, but scared for their property. A Virginia resident, a white Virginia resident, Eleanor Weaver, reflected on these events that Turner had started, and she stated that we hope our government would take some steps to put down Negro preaching. It is those large assemblies of Negroes that cause mischief. More stringent laws went into effect after that controlled the lives of black people, free or enslaved, limiting their ability to read, to write, and to move about. Nat Turner.
Some of you might have seen this before. So, do we say under 30? Do we say over 60? Under 30? Over 60? How many of you have seen this before? Oh, okay. So those of you know that there are two images up there. There is a elderly lady looking down, and then there's a younger lady turning away from the photo. Does everybody see both? So it's something you have to orientate yourself to, and even though I know it is there, I have to practice and concentrate on the young woman or the elderly woman. Okay, thank you. The next slide reads as follows: give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses learning to be breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Written by Emma Lazarus. It's from the poem, The New Colossus. So, what image do you think is going to pop up next? Statue of Liberty. The previous quote is a bronze plaque that is now on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. The purpose of the Statue of Liberty was liberty enlightening the world. It was a gift of friendship from the French government to America after the Civil War. So it will be our conclusion then that the Statue of Liberty is about immigrants coming to America. Between 1888 and 1924, 14 million immigrants came to our shores. To many of them, the Statue of Liberty was an assuring sign that they had arrived in a land of opportunity and dreams. To these anxious newcomers, the statue uplifted torch did not suggest enlightenment as her creators intended, but welcome to America. Liberty was an example. Liberty became a symbol of hope for generations of immigrants. How many of you have visited the Statue of Liberty? Most of you. The next image, my question to you is, does it surprise you? At the bottom of the feet of the Statue of Liberty are chains. It was not meant for the enlightenment of the world. It was a symbol of the African liberation that had occurred post the Civil War. So it's not about immigrants, and that's why I began with the picture I did about what we see and what we don't see. We have got to understand what the symbols are and what they mean to us and what they can mean to us. Now, I have to do apology. My foreign language is not very good, but I do want to tell you, I'm not going to pronounce the creator of the statue name. Is Frederick Augusta Bartholdi? I'll try that one. Next photo, please. Slide, please. Yeah, please. This is the original image that the creator of the Statue of Liberty was using as a model for what we have in our harbor. Really, it's in New Jersey, not New York, but that's the model. If you look at the next slide, this is the original facial image that Bartholomew was going to use for the Statue of Liberty. Notice the big nose. Notice the big thick lips. And if you compare that to what is out there now, there's a different image. And that was done deliberately. If you would then go to the video. You have the speakers on? technology in the 21st century. What this actually is telling you is some of the things I've shared with you already in regards to why the statue was created, who created it, and what we don't understand and what we need to understand about the history as it relates to us as African people. The next couple of slides show you some background information about not only the creator, but also the person who began the idea to give the gift of the statue to America to commemorate the liberation of African people in the aftermath of the assassination of Dr. King. So again, we have an image that was originally designed for the Suez Canal using an African features. That concept was taken back, brought back, put to the task of making it for what we call the Statue of Liberty. It's important for us to understand what Dr. Du Bois called the double consciousness of African people. We have to look at things from a different perspective because that statue that's in the harbor of New Jersey is not about, when we look at it as far as the liberation of people and the liberties that we do not have, did not have, and don't have today, it tells us something about the double consciousness of African people and where we are and what we need to do. When the pastor was up here earlier, he talked about our youth do not know our history. Some of us elders don't know our history, and some of us are crippled because we don't know. It is painful to understand what our ancestors went through. And when you read about it, it is not a pleasant experience. But they endured so that we would be here today. Amen. And we have a responsibility to help those who are here and help those who will be here in the future. So when we see that statue, we have the opportunity to say, it is, but it was not meant for us. It was meant for us. They redesigned it for a different purpose. But we've got to understand why we are here and what we can do. There's one book I want to recommend to you that talks about before the Mayflower. We know the Mayflower was 1492, but there's a book written by Ivan Van Sertimer called Before the Mayflower that talks about the contributions that African people made in America, or in the Americas, South America and North America, long before 1619. And I would strongly encourage you all to get a hold of that. In yesterday's paper, and I hate to say in the New York Times, but yesterday in the New York Times, there was a full-page magazine article dedicated to 1619. It's called the 1619 Project. I'm just going to read a small portion of it with you. A word of warning, there is gruesome material in these pages, materials that readers will find disturbing. That is unfortunate as it must be. American history cannot be told truthfully without a clear vision of how inhumane and immoral the treatment of Black Americans has been. By acknowledging this shameful history, by trying hard to understand its powerful influence on the present, perhaps we can prepare ourselves for a more just future. Too many of us believe that our people are oppressed. We have some freedoms, we have some opportunities. We're here because of what our ancestors endured for us. We need to be able to move forward to help each other in order to do what we need to do to liberate. And I know I'm using language that might be disturbing, but when I talk about the liberation of African people, we must be able to do what we need to do to go to the ballot box to pull the lever for the people that's going to help us the most. We need to see that our children, our grandchildren are educated so that when they enter post-secondary skills and have post-secondary skills, they have the skills that they need to be competitive. We have some difficult days that we're facing, and I encourage you to vote, organize, and do whatever. But always remember that we are here because our ancestors endured the whip, the hangman noose, and any other thing they could, but we are still here today. Thank you.
Our responsibility as we leave out of here tonight is to take what we have and inform those who are coming behind us what the road will look like. I won't paint a picture that it'll be filled with roses and we'll be singing Kumbaya with everybody. I want them to know that there are people that seek to tear you down, that there are people who disregard you just because of your complexion and melanin. But I also want them to be reminded that our ancestors 400 years ago, the 20 and some odd Africans that came to Port Comfort heard the same thing. But by the grace of God, they made it. By the grace of God, we've made it. By the grace of God, they'll make it. God provides and exits for our lives.
As we pause to remember the great Ma'afa, the African Holocaust that began with the Middle Passage, we know that you were with us through it all. We know that even though our captors intended to deny our humanity and own our bodies, we were created in your image, God, and you intended that we see ourselves as the children of God. We remember, we believe, the same God with us yesterday, today, and forever. As we pause to remember the great Ma'afa, we thank you, God, for endowing us with a fighting spirit of resistance that manifested itself in our unnamed ancestors who rebelled, died, and persisted. Those who fought back as soon as their enemies tried to capture them. We remember, we believe. Those who died resisting enslavement as they were being marched from West Africa's interior to its coast to be imprisoned in wretched dungeons, commonly called slave castles. We remember, we believe. Those who left the motherland through the door of no return, only to be packed into the belly of a ship like sardines, yet resisted with mutiny or even choosing to jump into the sea rather than being enslaved in a foreign land. We remember, we believe. Those who escaped to form independent maroon communities everywhere Africans were enslaved. We remember, we believe. The same God with us yesterday, today, and forever. We acknowledge Marcus Garvey's claim that there's no future for a people who deny their past, and we think it not robbery to call at least some of the many names of our ancestors and allies who battled for our freedom and equality in the fields, in the courts, and in every institution of society. Thank you, God, for Harriet Tubman, Nat Turner, Ella Baker, Malcolm X, Francois Mackandal, W.E.B. Du Bois, Barbara Jordan, Muhammad Ali, Gabriel Prosser, Crispus Attucks, Thurgood Marshall, Nelson Mandela, Shirley Chisholm, Ida B. Wells, Frederick Douglass, Nina Simone, John Brown, Anna Julia Cooper, Martin Luther King, Winnie Mandela, Toussaint Louverture, Fannie Lou Hamer, Marcus Garvey, John Henry Clark, Ashe. We remember, we believe. Our eyes were watching God as you infuse us with the hope, faith, and strength to endure and overcome the terrors wrought by chattel slavery, murder, rape, white supremacy, racism, lynching, Jim Crow, and mass incarceration. We remember, we believe, the same God with us yesterday, today, and forever. As children of God, we are empowered and demand reparation and true democracy today. Everywhere Africans were enslaved. We remember, we believe, the same God with us yesterday, today, and forever.
true to Amen. God bless all of you.
Oh.